Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is Sonship Education Part 1. And this is, what we're going to be doing now is sessions 1 and 2. Now, just so that we make the transition from where we've been into where we're going, I've got some things that you're going to put on your note takers here that will tie all of this book of Romans together. You're going to see some things, by the way, in this, not just doing it for review's sake. There are things that you're going to have to kind of have in your memory and go back and pull up that Paul is going to address with us, actually going to exhort us in verses 1 and 2 on things that we've already encountered. And so this is going to kind of refresh that in our thinking real quick and allow us to kind of move on when we get into verse 1. So let's just look at the review. So far in the book of Romans, Paul has taken us through justification, and that is the 5 proofs that we are justified unto eternal life and our new identity. Now, the part that's in yellow up here is the blanks on your note taker, and so I have found that every now and then, if I'll write these things down, those are the things that kind of stick in my memory more than if I'm just listening to them. And these are the things that you're going to have in your mind in just a moment. So this is not for nothing. Next of all, sanctification. The first 2 components and our new identity. That was given to us, of course, starting in Romans chapter 6 and running through Romans chapter 8 and verse 13. So we have the first 5 chapters of justification, Romans 6 through 8 of sanctification. And then in Romans chapter 8, verses 14 and 15, we came to our sonship orientation. And that is the 3rd component of our sanctification. And we made the cry of Abba, Father. And that cry of Abba, Father was yes to the opportunity to be educated by our Father and to know that we're going to have a place in the heavenly places and that we're going to be laboring with Him there. After sonship orientation, Romans 8, 14, and 15, starting in verse 16 and running on down through the rest of chapter 8, we come to our sonship establishment. We divided the rest of chapter 8 up into 3 parts. The first of those parts concerned our inheritance in the creature. And we understood that we were going to be joint heirs. We learned a little bit about the suffering, all that kind of business. I know I'm not mentioning every detail, but, we're just kind of labeling this as we go through. Now, the second part of sonship establishment was that we covered some inadequacies in prayer and the fact that God has made a provision for that. He knew about that. He's taken care of it. We don't have to worry about that. Because remember, God is not dealing with us from the standpoint of His omniscience. So if we don't tell Him about it, He's dealing with us like He doesn't know about it. And if you don't know what to ask for, everything would come to a grinding halt. He's made a provision for the Spirit to make intercession for you with groanings which cannot be uttered. And that's great, isn't it? Okay, and even though that was just a couple of short verses, that was the second part of sonship establishment. The next part was the 5 questions which were meant to produce unfailing confidence in God's Word. That what is written there is going to handle every problem we could ever encounter without any exceptions whatsoever. There is no special case that you will be to excuse yourself from being successful as a son. You can't say, well, I just wasn't a good student in school and I don't think I'm going to do good in this. That won't work. You know why? Because you have a superior teacher than what you had in school. I'm being facetious. I don't know why y'all so serious tonight. Well, yeah, all right. All right. Okay, and better looking. Let's just go with it. Let's just do the whole thing. Okay. Yeah, lots of hair. Thank you. God bless you. All right. I want to break these 5 questions down. No, brother. Okay.
I was thinking of the Holy Spirit.
Oh. Well, thank you, Sue. I'm kind of depressed now. No. The Spirit is, yeah, that's the good answer. Okay, now let's break these 5 questions down. First of all, we learned from those 5 questions that what we're calling the sonship curriculum, what is written for us in the Word of God is going to surmount all obstacles. Number two, it will overcome our own shortcomings. And that's really what I was referring to a moment ago when I said you're not going to be able to say, look, I'm just not smart. It doesn't matter. It's not how smart you are. It's not how much you enjoy being a student and that kind of business. But I tell you what it does involve your commitment. And if you're committed to get this done, God is committed to you succeeding as a son. And so it's just that simple. If you have that desire, you can do it. I promise you. Okay, next, to provide everything that we're going to need. I would just remind you of that. Remember the question that was associated with that? It says that if he delivered up his own son, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? Hey, if he went to the trouble to give us his son, what is he going to hold out on us on that we're going to need? See, there won't be any of that. All right, the next one is to work everything to our benefit. And I know that's that verse in verse 28 we were all very familiar with. All things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. And we understood that was not a promise that whatever was going on, it was all going to be okay and God was going to work it out to the way we wanted him to. He is saying that no matter what happens to you, good, bad, or indifferent, it's going to work to your benefit in your sonship life. And that's a great promise. And only a son can get that verse right, by the way. I preached that verse wrong too many times and never got close to what it was about. And then the last one here, and I believe it's the last one, is to make us perfected sons. And I just use that to encapsulate that more than conqueror concept that's sitting over there. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? And we talked about all of those issues. And then the last thing on your list right there that we covered was in Romans chapters 9, 10, and 11, and that is the dispensational change. And we learned a lot in those three chapters, although we went through them very quickly. If you followed the lessons that we do up out in West Texas, in 22 lessons, in 11 Sundays, we went through those three chapters. But even though it was pretty brief compared to the time we normally spend, we covered a lot of ground in those chapters. And there's a lot stacked in there. Now, it's at this point right here that I'm looking at this, and this is everything we've done from Romans 1 through Romans 11 in a nutshell, and I need to know from you now, is there anything that we're talking about here that you're unclear about, or you feel like there's a gap in your understanding, or there's something in there that you're just totally unclear about? Let me answer it for you, and let's deal with that, because I want this whole group to move together into the education. Let's not get so focused on getting that in the next 60 seconds that we can't make sure that we've got our questions answered. Anyone? Speak now, or forever hold your peace. Okay. Okay, so here we go. By the way, how many of you have gone through either online or in the class justification? Justification. Sanctification. Okay, I feel good about that. Okay, haven't come all the way through Romans chapter 11, and the fact that you don't have any questions of uncertainty. By the way, if you do later, if you go, you know what, I didn't realize it then, but I have a question now, don't hesitate to ask that question. It's important. All right, Romans chapter 12, that'll be the next thing that we'll look at up here. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Now, you didn't get notes, and I should say it here, you didn't get notes before you came to the study today because there was something that I put in sessions 1 and 2 in the notes that when I went through in 3 and 4, I looked back on that and I decided that wasn't exactly right. And I needed to go back and I needed to change that and make it right. And I didn't want to send you a set of notes in 1 and 2 that told you one thing, and then in 3 and 4, I corrected that thing So you'll get these notes this week. I'll send them to Irma when we get back, but I just didn't have a chance to do that before we left. So you'll get the corrected notes, and you'll never know what I got wrong. But I'm admitting it. You know, I've talked about this with Rick over and over. You know, one of the big problems with people is if they ever teach anything that isn't right, they feel obligated to have to stick with it.
That's true.
And that's because your peer group will rip you to shreds and destroy your credibility. I don't have any friends, so I don't care. It doesn't bother me. They already don't like me. So what? You know, I found out there's a guy up in the Northwest that actually spent time preaching against us. I didn't even know we were the subject matter. Hey, I'll take the publicity. I don't care.
Say that is great.
That is good. I'll take the publicity. You know what his beef was? Where we talked about the heir of God inheritance being one thing and the joint heir inheritance being connected to our suffering with Christ.
I had a guy send me an article on that.
Did you? Oh, that's one of those hot button. They all want to be a joint heir. I got news for you. Big surprise coming. Yeah. By the way, as you get on through the education, you're going to see that thing, the way we presented it, reinforced to the hilt. You're eventually going to get to a place in the education where you're going to look back and say, it can't be any other way. This is the way Paul has framed it up. And although in the beginning, when you first hear it, it is uncomfortable, isn't it?
They omit the last part of the verse. If so be.
That's exactly right.
They forget that.
Well, you know what? That's what my kids did growing up. They forgot all the ifs that went before their instructions.
Instruction of convenience.
Huh?
They figure they are suffering.
Oh, well, you know what? That suffering, that's a subject of real misunderstanding, isn't it? I mean, after all, God's bailing us out of that. That's the way they want to do that, right?
Do is ask it in His name, and it'll be done for you, right?
Just if 2 or 3 are gathered in my name. There you go. Okay. Hey, we've all been down that road, haven't we? Oh, name it and claim it. Okay. All right. What we're looking at, Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, is an exhortation. And I believe that there are, by the way, there are 2 kinds of exhortations. Anybody remember what those are? We covered this way back in orientation. Anybody recall what those were? I don't really expect you to remember that. This is not a test about your understanding. We just kind of mentioned in passing, there are pre-doctrinal exhortations. They're the ones that set you up. And then there are post-doctrinal exhortations. They're the ones that come after that. And we likened it like this. The pre-doctrinal exhortation is like the primer coat. The doctrine is like the paint. And then the post-doctrinal exhortation is like the clear coat that seals it all off to make as good a finish as possible. In my mind, I mean, there's probably lots of ways you could do that. If you're mudding a wall, there's the brown coat, and then there's the, you scratch on the finish coat, and you can do all that. Okay. My only point is, I like the primer paint because that's what makes the paint stick better. And that's exactly what the pre-doctrinal exhortation is supposed to do. And I believe Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 are both. They contain something that looks back to pull from that up to where you are and measure that you are ready to get into the education so that you know, okay, I am ready to go into the education. And the other thing it does is it presents something to you before you get into that doctrine that has to be in place. It's like that primer coat so that when you get into the doctrine, that stuff works the way it's supposed to. And I see this as doing both of those. Now, in fact, you have that on your note taker. Give me that next slide. And I forgot we're doing note takers. As a post-doctrinal exhortation, it looks backward as a checkpoint to make sure that you know you're ready to move into the education. How did you know you were ready to move into establishment? You made the cry of Abba Father. Now, just as that was officially done, I'm talking about officially between you and your Father, there's something else now that's about to be officially done between you and your Father. It's not for us to do as a group. We don't play emotional music and have you come down front and do it. You're going to do it in front of your Heavenly Father. And that's going to be something that's important. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But give me the second one. As a pre-doctrinal exhortation, it looks forward to ready us for the doctrine which is to follow. I'm sorry, I almost forgot that we were doing those note takers. I got caught up. We're going to look at both aspects of that in just a little bit, just to make sure that we have that down. But before we do, I want to show you on the PowerPoint something that George Crabbe, now remember George Crabbe wrote that book of English synonyms back when the English language had meaning, when those words really had meaning. And words, even synonyms, distinguished themselves from each other. As a result, I looked at this word exhortation. Now, I know it is an exhortation, but it's not, the word doesn't appear in the Scripture. But I thought I might just show you this real quickly. Put it up for me. Thanks, Trent. Our English word exhortation comes from two words. It's actually made up of a Latin word and a Greek word. Ex out of the Latin and hortor from the Greek. And that Greek word means to excite or impel to action. The exhortation is meant to excite you or impel you to action. And that's exactly what's going to go on here. I left this out. I think, is there another? No. Yeah, okay. No, give me that one. A superior or friend exhorts, and because his words carry authority, they rouse us to action. Exhortations are employed only in matters of duty or necessity, persuasions in matters of pleasure or convenience. You understand, if Ron and I are riding along and I want to stop and get something to drink, I'm persuading him to pull over and let's get something to drink. But I'm not exhorting him. It's not that big of a deal, you understand, unless I'm dying of thirst. Unless you have John Schallenberger with you in the car, right? Okay. I'll have to tell that story publicly one day so everybody knows all about John. Okay. Then it would be an exhortation. Okay. Paul is not commanding us, but by this exhortation, in fact, what you're going to see is he's beseeching you and not commanding you to do something. And so there's a way that he's forming the words in this verse very important for us to pay attention to. Now, I want to just make one more statement, and we're going to go to verse 1 in chapter 12 and start taking this apart. When I'm telling you that this is something that's kind of checking you out to make sure that you're ready to go on, I want to tell you what this is not. This checkpoint is not about whether or not you have memorized every detail of everything we've covered from Romans 1:1 to Romans 12. It is not about, can you stand up and teach this to someone else? This can be working in you, and neither one of those things would be true. So don't get to thinking that that's what it is. It's not that kind of measure. Now, Romans chapter 12, verse 1. I beseech you, therefore, brethren. And I'm not going to read the whole verse because we're just going to take a look at this first part. So let me take you back to George Crabbe and take a look at this word beseech. And here it is. Beseech is a species of asking. And there's a lot of words that we would use as synonyms. Beg, solicit, entreat, implore, and you could go on. Now, beseeching has an urgency to it, while entreating is more argumentative, to persuade by strong reasoning. Do you see that little bit of difference? One of them is an urgent asking. The other one is kind of arguing the case. Has God ever entreated us before in the book of Romans? Has he ever made a strong argument in order to persuade us? He has. He has done that. But in this particular case, he's beseeching us. And as the illustration that he gave, a kind parent will sometimes beseech an undutiful child to lay aside his wicked courses rather than plunge him deeper into guilt by an ill-timed exercise of authority. I'm not saying that there's also not, the pendulum swing on that, but that's just the illustration of beseeching that he uses. So all we're understanding from beseeching is he's asking us to do something, but he is urgently asking us to do it. This has some measure of seriousness to the request. Okay, now let's go back to Romans 12:1. I beseech you, therefore. When you see the word therefore, what do you know? All right, you're referring back to something said earlier, and that's how you know that this thing is pulling from something previous and pulling it back to your attention. In fact, now I need to write this on the board because we're going to go back over and over this again, okay? So when he says, I beseech you, therefore, is there a comma there? Yep. Brethren. And we'll just go that far for now, and then we'll get it again. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, you already know at this point in the verse that the motive, the reason he's beseeching us is because of something we've already encountered. Yes? Is that true? All right. So this is the motive. Well, the motive for beseeching us lies backwards. I know that looks up when you're looking at it on the screen. It looks like it's up, but it's before this. I'm actually looking like at the page. It's what came before. All right? What came before? And you got to be careful about this, because remember the way we broke this down when I outlined for this for you in the very front? We started about chapters 1 through 5, justification. Chapters 6 through 8, 13 was sanctification. And then Romans 8, 14 and 15 was the third component of sanctification. And then starting at 16 to 39 was our establishment. And then 9, 10, and 11 was the dispensational change. You remember we did all that? Well, how far back is he going? When you say therefore, you've got to understand, what is it that's in mind? Now, I'm going to tell you right now. Let's just do this. Here's justification unto eternal life, sanctification unto the functional life, and here's our sonship orientation. Here's our sonship establishment, and here is the dispensation of grace, the change. All right, now you got to know, because of the placement of Romans 12:1, because of when you run into the therefore, however far you think you need to go back, the one thing you can't do is jump over, because here you are now at Romans 12, and this is the checkpoint. What you can't do now is jump over this to go back to something up here. If that's what God intended to do, just think with me a moment. If God really didn't mean, because where we're about to go with this, let me just set the stage. Where we're about to go with this is definitely going to take us back up here, and you will have the temptation to forget all about the previous 3 chapters, 9, 10, and 11, and you won't hook those in at all. If God meant for us to leapfrog back and omit this altogether, what do you know is true? Or what would you know? I say, what is true? What would you know if he didn't mean for this to be included in what you're thinking about by therefore? What would change? What would change? Let me say it like that. What would be different? Because I'm saying, because he put therefore right here, if it includes anything back here, it also includes this. If he didn't include this, what would change? Huh?
The word would say, as it is written, maybe?
What would change?
Yeah.
Everything.
Well, okay. Well, that's true. That, you know what? That would have been the first verse in Romans chapter 9. If he didn't mean for 9, 10, and 11 to be part of the therefore, he would have written this right here. Do you see? Because he waited until he got through that to tell you therefore, the one thing you know you can't leave out is 9, 10, and 11. And I'm going to get more specific than that. As a matter of fact, I think I have something coming up on your note taker here. In fact, let me take you to George Crabb. Therefore, he says, it's for this reason, or it marks a deduction. In other words, I've seen something, therefore, he's coming to some kind of conclusion about it. Right. Okay, everybody sees that. Okay, so I just want to make sure because, well, this is different. The way we're doing this is different. So this therefore has to take you back. And if you didn't know anything else other than this, you know this. Paul is beseeching you on the basis of something he's already told you. Okay, now, with that in mind, let me see, I just want to make sure. Okay, now we're going to take you back to your note taker. And so I'm going to show you the three things in the dispensation of grace, or that dispensational change, that this could be. Paul is beseeching in view of what God desired to accomplish by bringing in the dispensation of grace. Now, do you know what that does? That incorporates all of chapters 9, 10, and 11. In other words, what all did God desire to accomplish? He desired to set Israel aside, and their status is no longer favored, but now it's a curse from Christ. He promised that he was not going to forsake that, but he was going to come back and restore that program at some time in the future when the fullness of the Gentiles come in. And then he talked to us about how we were supposed to look at all of that. Remember, it was Israel's present state, Israel's future state, and how we're supposed to view this dispensation of grace. So that would be all of 9, 10, and 11. But if you wanted to say the therefore didn't really go back and talk about all of that, and I think it really does, but in a more specific sense, don't you see how you could say he's beseeching us, right? Not Israel in this case. Remember, the conversation turned back to us at the end of chapter 11. And so really, if you're talking about the therefore being the reason he's beseeching us, then you would look at that stuff at the end of chapter 11 and say, what did he say to us that he is therefore beseeching us? You know, that's the basis for it. And here's the second part of that. The genius of God, and I'm calling it that, but I'm going to give you what the Bible said in just a moment. The genius of God and how God brought in this dispensation to us Gentiles. I said it that way so you'd only have three little words to write. What if I'd have done it out of the Scripture? You know what I would have said? I'd have quoted the Scripture. Oh, the riches of his wisdom and knowledge. Remember when he did that, followed by an exclamation point? When Paul was just gushing over God's great wisdom to do what he did. Now that was supposed to impact us. That was supposed we're supposed to start looking at that the way Paul looked at that. So that's a more narrow way of looking at therefore, and that kind of confines you to the end of chapter 11. But what we didn't talk about in chapter 11 is we did just mention it, but the very last verse in Romans chapter 11 contained a phrase at the end, and we didn't really talk about that phrase. And now I want to, because in the very strictest sense, or maybe the narrowest sense, the therefore would certainly refer to the last thing that was said, wouldn't it? With that in mind, by the way, I don't even know if I have that. Well, maybe we'll look at the verse, but I'll give you the third one on your... But it's his glory in connection to this dispensation of grace. And I'm hoping that what I did is I put that in there. I guess I did. Yeah, I did. So here's what we're going to look at. Romans chapter 11, and look at verse 33. Here's that, remember we talked about the whole thing, what God did when he brought in the dispensation of grace. Then we narrowed it down to the genius of God in doing this. And here's where Paul quotes, oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judges, ways past finding out. Who hath known the mind of God, or mind of the Lord, or who hath been his counselor, or who hath first given him, and it shall be recompensed unto him again. And then give me this next slide here. And then Romans 36, this is the last verse, and this is what narrows it even more. For of him and through him and to him are all things, to whom be glory forever. Amen. And I do not think, when I used to read that in the old days, I used to think Paul used to throw those little flowery phrases on there just to say, well, glory, like we do, well, glory to God. And it's a real general thing. It doesn't really, it's just like, well, isn't God good? And then somebody else is supposed to answer all the time. Okay. But you know what? It's more than that. This is context specific. Paul, in inspired scripture, is not taking one part of one verse to just flippantly make a statement that's just sheer emotion. But every bit of this is meant to effectually work in us. So you know what this glory is tied to? It is the glory of what God is going to receive because he made the dispensational change. Let me ask you, is God going to get any glory in eternity because of what he is doing with us in this dispensation of grace? See, this is not just a general thing. Paul's got that in view. To whom be glory forever. Will there be eternal glory for God out of this dispensational change? You better believe it. And I think that's why that's the last sentence that Paul is using as he wraps that up in Romans chapter 11. So it's that, see, and all I did was really narrow that down. It's the whole thing of the dispensational change, and then really it's the wisdom and knowledge, the riches of the wisdom and knowledge of God and doing it just the way he did it. And then it's the eternal glory that God... So think of it like this. I beseech you, in view of God's glory in doing what he did, brethren, he's going to ask us to do something on the basis of that. Now that makes a difference to me. If Paul is telling me what I'm asking you to do, God's glory is at stake at, I want to hear it. Right? And you want to hear it. Okay, both of you. Okay, God bless you. Okay. All right. Glory to God. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. This, so that gets us this far. I beseech you, therefore, and now the word brethren. Give me that next, there you go. I beseech you, therefore, brethren. Honest to goodness. I looked at this and I said to myself, because of the context that this is in view of what that therefore took me back to, and knowing that all this really is contextually sensitive. Remember, he's talking to people who didn't just learn about their sanctification, they've made the cry of Abba Father, they've gone through their establishment as a son. Now he's talked about this dispensational change, and ending with the glory that's going to be his out of that. And you know what I took those brethren to be? I took those brethren to be sons that are doing just what we're doing. They've said yes to the offer of their father, and they're ready to get into the education. That's what I took that to be. And then I found a verse that confirmed that I was right in looking at it in that context. Because Paul used this word brethren already. And give me that next one, Trent. Romans chapter 8, verse 29. For whom he did foreknow. Do you remember what God foreknew? He was going to have sons and daughters to labor with him. Now, before we read this, remember, God could have done it all on his own, right? He could have just said, me and my son are going to do it. But instead, before the foundation of the world, God said, I'm not going to do it on my own. And son, you and I are not going to do it on our own. But I have this idea, even though there are no sons and daughters out there yet, I have this idea that we can have sons and daughters do this thing with us. That's what he foreknew. And it says, and for whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his son. Because when he thought about having sons and daughters, he also thought, you know what? I've got to make it so that those sons and daughters are conformed to the image of my son. That's the only way that was going to work, right? That he might be the firstborn among many brethren. That's exactly what he's talking about when he talks about brethren, isn't it? So when I got over to that verse, I thought, whoa, I got that right. I got that right without the verse. I got it right. Blind hog found an acorn. Okay. Now, George Crabb, I'm going to take you. Let's go back. Okay. I beseech you, therefore, brethren. Any questions so far? This is straightforward, isn't it? Okay. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God. I have to admit that in all the days that I ever preached Romans 12, 1 and 2, and as a young preacher boy, I memorized that verse early on. I preached on that verse. I talked about that verse. It came up in conversations. And if anybody in all those years had ever said to me, can you tell me what the mercies of God are? I would have gone, well, they're God's mercies. Because I couldn't have named them. When you walk out of here today, you're going to know exactly what those mercies are and why it is by those mercies that you're going to do what he asked you to do. Remember, notice I didn't say it's by those mercies that he beseeches you. He's beseeching you because of something he's already told you. Now, by the mercies of God, comma, okay, let me just get this next one up, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice. All right, now we'll just stop there. So now we're on the mercies of God. So in order to know what that is, by the way, to know what that is, we have to really understand what it means when something is called a mercy. Okay? This is not a verb. This is a noun. Mercies, they're a thing. Okay? So I'm taking you back to George Crabb again. Mercy is from two Latin words which produce, in other words, the two words together produce affliction of the heart, signifying the pain produced by observing the pain of others. In other words, when you look at someone who is in pain and it grieves you, it pains you to see them that way, the obvious result is you want to give them mercy. That's all he's saying by that. Now let's look at the definitions. Number one, mercy denotes the disposition or act of forbearing to inflict pain by the exercise of power. A judge can do that, okay? God can do that. God extends mercy toward us as offenders, and God shows mercy by forgiving our sins. Okay? Now, were we offenders? Yes, we were. And did we deserve a punishment? Yes, we did. But instead, God offered us mercy. Here's the second definition. Mercy can also be extended to someone who is in trouble, whether from their own fault or any other cause. Now, that's not a judicial type thing. That's you going home tonight and you see someone on the side of the road with a flat and you realize they're just helpless and you have mercy and you want to help them. So you pull over and you assist them. Now, it may not be their fault that they have a flat, but they're in trouble. Now, the reason I'm going through this is because in order to understand mercy, you have to understand these two things. Back to your note taker. Either some offense has been committed. Is it on the back of the first page? You don't have that? You don't have that? Do you have it? No? Oh, you need to write that in. There's two components of mercy. Anytime there's mercy, I really want you to get this. I'm sorry, I accidentally erased that from your note taker, evidently. Anytime there is a mercy, one of two things is true. Either some offense has been committed in which now there is an opportunity to show mercy, or, give me that second one, Trent, some trouble has come upon someone. Now, the reason I go to the trouble to point this out is because many times these mercies, because that will make a difference of how you define those mercies. If you're not in any trouble and you have committed no offense, look, I have a way to illustrate it, but it's terrible. because you can't follow it all the way through, but generally I think it will work. Let me give it to you like this. There's a little kid standing in the candy store, and he's looking up and he's looking at that candy, and he doesn't have enough money in his hand. He just got half of it. And you know what? Now, you can't really classify that as trouble, I know. But you know what? You look at that, you kind of feel sorry for him, so what do? You dip down your pocket, you get the rest of that change, and you give it to him. And you know what? That was kind of an act of mercy. I know it's a bad illustration, but it's kind of an act of mercy, and then he can buy the candy. But what if the kid is standing there and he's got a $100 bill in his hand? If you reach down in your pocket and you give him the same amount of change, is that an act of mercy? Why? You're right. He didn't need it. He wasn't in any difficulty, was he? See, mercy is not a synonym for goodness, or not a synonym for contribution. And it's not a synonym for blessing. It's not a synonym for that. Mercy implies some kind of trouble, or some kind of punishment, or some kind of pain. Is everybody with me? Because if you don't stick with mercy, you're going to find a bunch of things back there in Romans that really aren't mercies, and now you're going to call them mercies. And you know what? Because you misidentified them, you can no longer identify these for what they are. The mercies of God are not the motive for Paul beseeching us. They are the means by which we do what he's about to ask us to do. And that's where that word by comes in. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second. So we did the George Crabbe definition of mercy, didn't we? Okay. Now, have we run into the word mercy before? Yes, we have. Let me give it to you real quickly. Romans chapter 9. For he said to Moses, I'll have mercy on whom I have mercy, and compassion on whom I'll have compassion. And you remember he was quoting that. Remember when God made that stipulation when he was giving Israel the law, that, you know what, I don't have to abide strictly by this law. I will have mercy anytime that I decide to have mercy. And it's a good thing, because he'd had to wipe them out several times if he hadn't done that. And it was on that basis he was able to deal with us as Gentiles. Because he didn't say, I'll have mercy on Israel. He said, I'll have mercy on whom I'll have mercy. It happens again in verse, give me the next one, 16. So then it's not of him that willeth, nor of him that runneth, but of God that showeth mercy. And then again in Romans chapter 9, verse 18. Therefore he hath mercy on whom he hath mercy, and whom he will he harden. Talking about Pharaoh. Remember, we're doing that thing. And then lastly here in Romans 9, verse 23, and that he might make known the riches of his glory on the vessels of mercy. And that talked about us. Why were we the vessels of mercy? Because we were the recipients of God's mercy in this dispensation of grace. And then 4 times in chapter 11, the word mercy gets used. Here's the first one, verse 30. For as ye in times past have not believed God, yet now have obtained mercy. That's the new way God is dealing with us in the dispensation of grace. The next verse, verse 31. Even so have these also now not believed, that through your mercy they also may obtain mercy. So not just us, but also a Jew has the ability to get mercy in the dispensation of grace, even though his program has been sidelined. And the last one is Romans 11:32. For God hath concluded them all in unbelief, that he might have mercy upon all. But you would notice all 8 of those times that mercy appears, they're in the singular and not in the plural. Because this says the mercies of God. Now, I'm not saying that God wasn't merciful in doing that. Of course he was. But is that what he's talking about when he's talking about, I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm going to urgently ask you, you sons, in view of something that I have just told you, I'm going to ask you, by the mercies of God, to now do something. Now, the last thing that I want to do before we run out, and this is going to run out, I set my clock on West Texas time, and out here our sessions are a tad longer. So it's going to go off, and I do have I have 5 more minutes, okay? Okay. So don't, okay. I know, I don't think that's the next thing that's on the PowerPoint. Let me just look here. Oh, no, that's not going to do. Let me talk about the word by, and I'll do it just like this. I looked up the word by. Oh, I want to say it's in here. Okay, let me just do it now, and we'll get to it. when you say I'm doing something by whatever, it means through the agency or means of. In other words, I'm coming to your house. How are you getting there? I'm getting there by taxi. What does that mean? I'm getting there through the agency or by through the means of a taxi. Or if someone says, I'm coming by plane. I'm not driving. They're getting there by means of a plane. So you see, when you see the word by, you're saying through the agency or means of. Now read it like that. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, through the agency or means of the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice. That changes it, doesn't it? Because here's what everybody does. They act like the word therefore isn't there at all. And they act like the motive is the mercies. The reason God is beseeching us is because of the mercies. That's not it. The reason is beseeching us is written just before this. And now he's going to ask you to do something, and he's going to say, I want you to do that through the agency or through the means of those mercies of God. So he's not just telling you what to do, he's telling you how he wants it done. Do you see that? He's really explaining this. This is not going to be out in left field for you. So now that we've covered this word by, here's what we're going to do. We're going to come back from the break, and then I'm going to show you the mercies of God. Because you can't do this apart from the mercies of God anyway. You can try to produce it, but God won't accept it. There is one way he's going to accept this, and it's not our best effort. It's going to be through something he has already provided. And you know what that means? We're living then out of what he has done, not out of what we can do. That's going to make a huge difference. That's why it's by the mercies of God. Everybody get that?